activity and you're not able to eat, you're not allowed to eat, you're going to get wore out. You're going to get wore out pretty quickly. And so everybody's pretty wore out from this. And so Jonathan realizes that the soldiers could have done a much better job fighting if they'd been allowed to take a break and have something to eat. And so again, we see that there's a suggestion here. This battle lasted for several hours. They find this honey on the ground. It appears to have been part of the spoil of the Philistines. They had apparently taken up honey from whatever sources they had found there in that land, and they had put stores of it around. Some of it had apparently fallen out of the trees or whatever, or was laying on the ground, and so they, rather than be able to take advantage of this find of food, no, instead they're held back from eating it. No, there really isn't any indication of why he would make an order like that. It's one of the elements of the commentators point to when they point to that Saul's growing sort of obsession with himself, and we will see more of that. He becomes more and more sort of obsessed with himself, and this becomes part of his ego at work, part of his desire to have this great control over all the people. Pardon? Yeah. Yeah, he doesn't want him to take a break. You got to keep fighting. I want you to keep fighting and keep fighting and keep fighting, because we're gonna wipe these Philistines out. And is not thinking about the implications of what he's calling for. And yeah, that's a good point. He's probably not thinking of the implications of what he's calling for. And yeah, he creates a situation where people are just exhausted. You know, they're just frankly exhausted from fighting for hours and hours and hours on end. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it was a personal. That's a good way to put it. It was a personal vendetta. It was a personal. Objective of his own, and he's gonna have everybody going along with him on this, as you say, personal vendetta against the Philistines. He's gonna show them, and if it means fighting all day without a thing to eat, then that's the way it's going to be. And the problem with that is, of course, that people were getting exhausted. They were getting famished. Yes. Yeah, Jonathan knew. Jonathan understood. This was not a wise command. This was not a good order, because we could have, Jonathan even points out, basically saying we could have done much more. We would have done much better if we had stopped, or we had allowed, some of these men to stop and eat. We could have kept the battle going. And kept the fight going to the Philistines, and instead now they're able to run away, and we're not able to pursue them because we're exhausted. Verse 31. Then they struck among the Philistines that day from Michmash to Ajalon, and the people were very weary, and the people rushed greedily upon the spoil, and took sheep and oxen and calves and slew them on the ground, and the people ate them with the blood. Then they told Saul, saying, "Behold, the people are sinning against the Lord by eating with the blood." And he said, "You have acted treacherously. Roll a great stone to me today." And Saul said, "Disperse yourselves among the people and say to them, let each of you bring his ox or his sheep and slaughter it here and eat, and do not sin against the Lord by eating with the blood." So all the people that night brought each one his ox with him and slaughtered it there. And Saul built an altar to the Lord, and it was the first altar he built to the Lord. They were forbidden, of course, to eat the blood. This was in Leviticus 7. Leviticus 7 and verse 26. You are to not eat blood, eat any blood, either of bird or of animal, in any of your dwellings. Any person who eats any blood, even that person shall be cut off from his people. They were forbidden to eat the blood. They had ways of slaughtering animals that drained the blood out, and they were to follow those procedures, but they were not doing it. In their haste to get something to eat, they were being careless. They were being sloppy, and Saul here, notice the phrasing though. He says, "You have acted treacherously." He's blaming them for what's happened here. Well, you are rushing on this food, and now it's your fault. It's not my fault. It's your fault. And that we find that to being the case with Saul a lot of the time, is that as he runs into one situation or another, why it's never quite his fault. It's always somebody else's fault. He says, so he instructs him, bring the stone to me, get this stone to me. He uses the stone apparently as a place to slaughter the animals and allow them to bleed out, and then uses that same stone to begin building an altar. But some of the commentators, as we look through this account, we see that he has this concern. Yes, the people are sinning because they're eating the animals with their blood, but there is no real remorse. They don't see any real remorse from Saul over what's happened. They just see this sort of a perfunctory, yeah, all right, let's follow the rules, guys. Kind of an attitude, and there's no real concern for the fact that they are violating the law of God. It's more the attitude of, okay, well, let's get this done because that's part of the process we've got to follow. They get the sense that his obedience in this matter was merely kind of a form keeping and not a real concern over the fact that these people are sinning against God. Verse 36. Then Saul said, "Let us go down after the Philistines by night and take spoil among them until the morning light, and let us not leave a man alive. Leave a man of them." So Saul, after they've had a chance to eat, finally, he says, all right, let's continue the battle and let's go after the Philistines. And they said, "Do whatever seems good to you." So the priest said, "Let us draw near to God here." And Saul inquired of God, "Shall I go down after the Philistines? Wilt thou give them into the hand of Israel?" But he did not answer him on that day. And Saul said, Draw near here, all you chiefs of the people, and investigate to see how this sin has happened today. Now notice there's a lot of things here that are implied but not said. Okay, so there's a lot of implied ideas here. First of all, Saul wants to continue the battle. He wants to continue the pursuit of the Philistines. The people are willing. They're willing to go after. Now notice that they're willing to go after the Philistines. And so, but a priest says, let's get God involved in this decision. Let's have God give us some input. So they inquire of God, but God doesn't give them an answer. Saul immediately assumes that there is sin, okay? Now, we might ask, why does Saul think that there is sin? Well, Saul knows he's done this oath, and yet he's equating his oath to a violation of the law of God. He's in that sense, he's sort of elevated his own commands to having the strength of a command from God, is the implication here. He's looking for this sin in the others and not sin in himself. So he's going, all right, who sinned? And let's investigate and see how we figure it out. He doesn't look to himself and going, well, did I do something wrong? We don't notice that. He doesn't look to himself. It's always looking at somebody else going, well, all right, what did you do? What did you do to foul this up? It was silence. Yeah, God answered with silence. Again, some of the commentators think, why does God not respond? And the answer could be that God is fully aware that Saul is only inquiring for his own glory, if you will, for his own. As Rita points out, he's got this vendetta, and that's the whole thrust of what he's trying to do. And God is basically saying, you're not paying attention to me anyway. Why would you start paying attention to me now? So it says, draw near here, all you chiefs, is verse 38. Draw near here, all you chiefs and people, and investigate and see how this sin has happened today. Again, he's calling it a sin that they have violated his oath. For as the Lord lives, who delivers Israel, though it be in Jonathan my son, he shall surely die. But not one of the people answered him. Now that too is an interesting verse. That too is an interesting statement, because it suggests that Saul already knows or suspects who it is that's violated his oath. He already suspects Jonathan. That's the clear implication here, that he's already got some idea of who it is that has violated his oath. And is not, here he has, this is a good opportunity for him to refute the order. Okay, it was a dumb order, and yes, I know Jonathan didn't hear it to begin with, and so I'm going to withdraw the oath. No, he doesn't do that. Once he's made his word, he's going to stand there defending that position, regardless of how indefensible it is. He's going to defend that position. And there's a stubbornness here. We will see that throughout Saul's remaining career as king, this increasing stubbornness that the man has, where once he is convinced he is right, he will not let go of it for any reason. He might temporarily back off, but he never fully backs off. He always comes back and stubbornly insists that he's right. Regardless of what the position is, he's right. And we also note, not one of the people answered him. Now, some of these people knew that Jonathan had tasted the honey. They were there telling Jonathan, oh, didn't you know your father put us under an oath? And Jonathan didn't know that. And some of these people knew that. And yet not one of them speaks up to go point the finger at Jonathan saying, well, it was him, Saul. It was him. He's the guy. Not one of them is willing to accuse Jonathan, because apparently even the people knew this was a dumb idea. And so here you are confronted with this fellow who's bound and determined to have his own way, even when that way is dumb. And it's clear here the people are not willing to go along with it. He says, then he said to all Israel, you shall be on one side, and I and Jonathan my son will be on the other side. Again, the fact that he separates Israel on one side and just him and his son on the other side suggests he knows that it's either him or Jonathan. He knows that, or at least he strongly suspects that. And so by his very action, it indicates that he's already made up his mind. And the people said to Saul, do what seems good to you. Therefore Saul said to the Lord, the God of Israel, give a perfect lot. And Jonathan and Saul were taken, but the people escaped. And Saul said, cast lots between me and Jonathan, my son. And Jonathan was taken. So here is the lot. There's a little bit of a irony here. If you notice, there's a little bit of an irony that here is Saul using the very same method by which he was chosen to be king to identify between him and his son. Again, it's clear that the Israelites, they know who violated the oath. They know who violated Saul's command, although he did it innocently. He didn't know about it, and he did so innocently. And they also know that Jonathan has initiated this great victory. They declare so later on. And yet we see what happens in verse 43. Then Saul said to Jonathan, "Tell me what you have done." So Jonathan told him and said, "I indeed tasted a little honey with the end of my staff that was in my hand. Here I am, I must die." And Saul said, "May God do this to me and more so, for you shall surely die, Jonathan." Saul is the one who's ready. He's ready to condemn Jonathan to death. Here is his beloved son, and yet even now his stubbornness, his ego won't let him let go of that stupid command. He won't let go of it. He's going to cling to the bitter end to his opinion. He's going to cling to the bitter end to believing that he's right. And Josephus writes about this and says that Jonathan speaks, saying, "I did not desire, Father, to spare me. Death will be to me very acceptable when it proceeds from thy piety, and after a glorious victory, for it is the greatest consolation to me that I leave the Hebrews victorious over the Philistines." Jonathan knows they won a great battle. He knows that they could have won an even bigger battle. They could have had an even bigger victory, except for that dumb order. It's to Jonathan's credit, by the way, that he doesn't call his father out on it, and basically ask his father, "All right, why did you call for this dumb command? Why did you call for this dumb oath that's limited? That through it we've limited our victory against these Philistines." Jonathan instead is ready to accept whatever judgment comes upon him from his father. Notice the language here that Saul uses. It says, "May God do this to me and more also, for you shall surely die, Jonathan." Some folks have pointed out that language there that Saul uses we find that kind of phrasing only one other place in the Bible. Do you know where that is? You know what character in the New Old Testament uses sort of that same phrasing? Huh? No, not Satan. Pretty close. No, not yet. The only other person to use that same kind of phrasing was Jezebel in the days of King Ahab. And there is some suggestion that this might have been some kind of a pagan oath of some sort, and that somehow Saul is incorporating this pagan oath into his own language. For whatever reason, we don't know, but that he is incorporating this kind of paganistic oath taking into his behavior. Again, a sign of his stubbornness, a sign of his willfulness against God. Is that not true? Okay. Well, it is. Yeah, I suppose that's similar, somewhat. But this idea of about being put to death, but apparently that was some sort of formalistic. There is some thought by the commentators that this may have been some sort of a formalistic pagan oath that some folks were using, and we see Jezebel using it. We see Saul using it, and as Gary points out, Ruth used it, and Ruth would have been familiar to some degree with some of those paganistic formulas. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a lot of Jonathan. There's a lot about Jonathan to admire. He is where his father is fairly casual about religion. Jonathan appears to be genuinely God-fearing. And whereas Saul has the attitude that any who oppose me need to be eliminated, even if it's my own son. Any who oppose me or defy me, they need to be eliminated. And we don't see that attitude from Jonathan. As you point out there, Jonathan is willing, if it need be, to be put to death on account of his father's oath. And that is, that's a high honor to Saul, and a real mark of Jonathan's character. There is a lot about Jonathan to admire. We see in verse 45, though, we go on from verse 45. The people said to Saul, "Must Jonathan die, who has brought about this great deliverance in Israel? Far from it. For as the Lord lives, there shall not be one hair of his head fall to the ground, for he has worked with God this day." So the people rescued Jonathan, and he did not die. Then Saul went up from pursuing the Philistines, and the Philistines went to their own place. You can imagine, I think, Saul's frustration and anger over this, as the people demand that Jonathan be saved. No, Jonathan's not going to be put to death. He will not bear the penalty of this oath. There is the law of the judgment of the vow that we find over in Leviticus 27. Leviticus 27 and verses 1 to 3. Again, the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Speak to the sons of Israel and say to them, when a man makes a difficult vow, he shall be valued according to your valuation of persons belonging to the Lord. If your valuation is of a male from 20 years old even to 60 years old, then your valuation shall be 50 shekels of silver after the shekel of the sanctuary." There was apparently a way to buy your way out of a vow, and in this case, it would have been 50 shekels of silver. If this is a correct correlation between this vow, this oath that Jonathan finds himself under, and this law. Well, that's true. He wasn't. He wasn't under that vow. He never agreed to that vow. But the people, it says the people rescued him, or ransomed him. They did ransom him. So I'm not sure. I'm not sure exactly how they ransomed him. I assumed it might have been, From an idiot. Well, from a stubborn mule-headed father, they rescued him. It's interesting. You talked about God being Israel. And I heard Bob say God did answer. And he did. Apparently, it wasn't God's will that the Philistines be wiped out. Yeah. Defeat is one thing, wiped out was another. He'd given them a man to kill every man, Jack. Yeah. So he did later to the Amalek. That's right. Yeah, he simply wanted them out of that part of the land. Yeah. That idea of that the Philistines were not to be utterly wiped out. There was no command like that. It's just mainly get them out of Israel. It says then. So people rescued Jonathan. He did not die. Verse 45. And then verse 46. Then Saul went up from pursuing the Philistines, and the Philistines went from their own place. Now, some of the commentators suggest that perhaps Saul saw the error of his sin, and he was sorrowful for that, and he retired from pursuing the Philistines. But others in reading this kind of wonder, perhaps this is a little bit of petulance on the part of Saul, where Saul is being confronted by people who are determined to rescue his son, and faced with that disagreement over his policy, Saul takes the attitude of, well, it's my ball and I'll take it and go home. And that may be the case. That may be fitting to the personality of this man at this time, that he gives up from pursuing the Philistines, not because God didn't tell him to keep pursuing God didn't tell him to keep pursuing the Philistines, not because he realizes, yeah, I made a bad mistake and I'm going to withdraw. No, he may have withdrawn because, well, if you're not going to go with me, then I'm just not going to go. That kind of a petulance may have been fitting to his behavior.
It's real easy to do that. In all three instances where Saul sinned,
Yes.
he does so in confusing his own leadership with the will of God.
Yes.
And
That's.
Decides, for instance, previously he decided that he had to offer the sacrifice because God wanted him to go against the Philistines, and here he does the same thing. And in the 15th chapter, he does the same thing.
Yes.
He confuses, because he's been placed in a position of leadership, he confuses his leadership as being the will of God. And it's real easy for men,
That's
it's
okay.
real easy for men to do that. Think that because I'm the leader, my decision must be the will of God. That's not true.
I thought that I understood your point to be generic and not specific.
I preached it.
But yes, exactly right. We're going to see that as we go forward, that every time, or as John points out, and several of the commentators point out, Saul begins to confuse, well, what I want obviously must be what God wants. And he begins to sort of confuse that relationship. Go ahead, Bill. I'm sorry. Yeah. Several of the commentators have pointed out just that, Bill, that in every case we find when Saul sins, we do not find an example of genuine repentance. We do not find a case where he really genuinely repents for what he's done. Whereas with David, when he sinned, there is evidence that he, yes, genuinely, sincerely repented for what he had done. And that may be the difference, the real difference between the two men.
Alan, I've seen elders,
Bob. Go ahead. You first and then Bob.
I'm just closer to sit up. I've seen elders in the church who make that same mistake. They think because God has appointed them to the office by the means of the scripture, that whatever they decide is God's will. And that's not true. I've seen people who make that decision about government. Because God has ordained government, whatever the government decides is God's will. And that's not true either.
That's true. Bob? Okay. Yeah. Yes. Yeah, if he's familiar with the operation of the kingdoms around him, those kings rule with absolute autocracy, with absolute rule. And as you say, the king's word becomes law, and Saul just wants to kind of follow along, and he wants to have the same basically the same level of authority as he sees these other kings having.
It brings up another issue. Did God refuse to allow them to go because of Jonathan? And need to get into this whole, why did the lot fall on Jonathan? They must have asked a separate question.
Yeah.
Who ate?
Yes.
So that if it was God's will, they not pursue the Philistines that night. then there's a separate question Paul was saying. They assumed it was because they'd sinned.
Yeah.
Jonathan hadn't sinned. And so the question is, why did the lot fall on Jonathan?
Yeah, it may have been, who has violated my oath?
Yeah, probably God was trying to show Saul that he wasn't as autocratic as he thought he was.
Well, it does almost seem like a test. Are you really going to put your son to death over this, over this silly, this silly command you've given, and the fact that your son didn't know about your command? Are you really going to do that? And I think he does. I think he seriously gives Saul a chance to back away, just like he gives all of us a chance to back away. And by that, he kind of tests us. Are we going to back away from a sin, or are we going to just completely blindly hang on to it? And it was clear in the case of Saul, oh yeah, I'm hanging on. I'm hanging on to the bitter end. We wrap up this chapter then with just this little conclusion, sort of a concluding paragraph, if you will, talking about the activities of Saul, kind of giving an encapsulated form of Saul's activities and what's going on with his family. And in doing this with his family, what they're doing really is introducing a number of other persons that will be found throughout the text, so that we can understand the relationship between them and Saul. Verse 47, now when Saul had taken the kingdom over Israel, he fought against all the enemies on every side, against Moab, the sons of Ammon, Edom, the kings of Zobah, and the Philistines, and wherever he turned, he inflicted punishment. And he acted valiantly and defeated the Amalekites and delivered Israel from the hands of those who plundered them. That's an interesting phrase and thought, given what's coming up here in a few minutes, where we're going to be reading in detail about the Amalekites here in chapter 15, which we probably won't get to today. We'll get to it next week. He did, in fact, inflict and defeat the Amalekites. He did, in fact, fight valiantly. This is to his credit. He did lead the Israelites in a very competent way. This was, again, some commentators continue to think this would have been a gift from the Holy Spirit, that he had this ability, was given this ability to command and control and to establish good battle plans and so forth. And he uses them effectively against all of these enemies. We see this ongoing set of battles that he goes. There is no time apparently during Saul's reign when the kingdom is at peace. They are constantly fighting against one enemy or after another to push these enemies of Israel out of the away from the country. Verse 49, now the sons of Saul were Jonathan and Ishvi and Malchi-Shua, and the names of his two daughters were these: the name of the firstborn Merab, and the name of the younger Michal, and the name of Saul's wife was Ahinoam, the daughter of Ahimaaz, and the name of the captain of the army was Abner, the son of Ner, Saul's uncle. And Kish was the father of Saul, and Ner, the father of Abner, was the son of Abiel. Now the war against the Philistines was severe all the days of Saul, and when Saul saw any mighty man or any valiant man, he attached him to his staff. And so again, here we see something of the leadership, the military coordination of Saul, in that he finds good men, he recruits these good men, and maintains a standing army, which the Israelites never had before. Didn't have a standing army, but now they do have a standing army. There's constant warfare, as this points out. And again, we introduce some of these other characters that we're going to see later. Ishvi is probably, as we point out here, another name for Ishbosheth. And of course, Michal was going to go on, and she'll ultimately be married to David, and we'll see that relationship develop. And so we get some sense of the family of Saul. We get some sense of the relationship, Abner as his commander. Of course, Abner will ultimately be murdered by Joab. We'll see that later. That occurs, I think, in the 2 Samuel. But we'll see that ultimately transpire, and we'll see all of these characters come about. All right, I'm going to stop there today, and we'll continue on with chapter 15 next week. I appreciate your comments this morning. Thank you.